Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. We're covering the latest news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. Here's what's coming up.
我想应该说是差不多敲定了，就是在同一个 Arizona 同一个厂子上面的 Phase 2，5奈米是 Phase 1，3奈米是 Phase 2。
We ask whether the world's largest contract chipmaker's US plant heralds a new era for the global chip supply chain. Joining me in the studio to discuss this are Chen-yi, National Yangming Jiaotong University Senior Vice President and Professor, Institute of Electronics, and formerly Executive Yuan Adjunct Researcher and Science and Technology Policy Advisory Office Member, as well as MediaTek Education Foundation Board Member, and Mezger, Neumonda Chief Operations Officer, who is a memory chip expert. And from San Jose, California, Konrad, a former TSMC director and currently University of California, Berkeley chair and professor, and DigiTimes columnist, speaks to our political editor, Wang. And from Taipei, I speak to Roy Lee, Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research, Deputy Director at the Taiwan WTO Center. We also hear from Economy Minister Wang Mei-hua in her exclusive interview with Wang. Vice President Lee, Marco, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the global market trend, first of all. Global semiconductor revenue for the third quarter of 2022 was $147 billion, which was down 7% from $158 billion in the previous quarter. And 2023 revenue is projected to decline 3.6% in 2023 to $596 billion. Vice President Lee, how significant is this global slump in consumer demand?
From my observation, before this year, during the COVID-19 pandemic, in fact, the semiconductor business has been growing a lot more than the average. So I would say that after the oversupply, now it's become into the recession. It's a kind of economic recession cycle, but from my friends in the science park, they mentioned that this drop is not very usual. It's just like a cliff drop. So they expect that starting from middle next year, the growth now will be big and maintain at the average. So I would say that this global slump, in fact, is an effect from the several reasons. One of the major two is the U.S.-China economic war, and the second one is the Russia-Ukraine war. So these two, in fact, are the major key factors. So, starting from next year, probably this recession will be changed a little bit, and probably we'll be back to a normal growth curve.
By 2023?
Yeah.
That quickly, even though there's Gartner predicted a 3.6% drop.
Yeah, I think because even now, many people say that it's a recession, in semiconductor business, but there are still many industry trends like car electronics. They always mention that they lack of semiconductor chips, so that they cannot deliver the vehicles on time. So in some segment, for example, like a PC, like a notebook, maybe it's already meet the plateau. Yeah, but for other business tracker, like a car, like others industry tracker, they still need a lot of semiconductor chip. So consider these several factors. I would say that starting from next year, maybe middle 2023. Yeah, the growth rate will be back to the normal curve. So that's my observation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marco, so starting to recover next year. What are your thoughts?
I would say next year, in terms of the revenue, we would see a reduction, a slight reduction on the semiconductor market overall. But you have to see, if you look at the memory market, we have at the moment like double-digit reduction quarter over quarter, significantly.
Let me quote to you the Samsung profit drop of 32%, the first since 2019. So is this significant?
It is significant, but I think to put this in perspective, it's also kind of normal. Memory has always been very cyclical, going up and down, up and down. So what we see here right now, and what is probably a little bit more different of what Samsung and the other memory manufacturer have done, they significantly reduced CapEx for next year. And on top of this, they also have reduced wafer in for the support. So these are two very drastic measurements to cope with it. So I would also say what CY mentioned, looking into next year.
So when you say reduce CapEx, you mean capital expenditure?
Excuse me, yes, capital expenditure. So because normally in semiconductor, to make the investment and to cope with the future demand, you need to plan way ahead, right? So like several years in order to do this. And so they cut back the CapEx, what they were planning for next year, not to the extent because they have been more optimistic before about it. But the price erosion, if you see that memory is accounting for almost 1/3 of the global semiconductor market, this you will feel in the revenue, right? So maybe you still ship the same amount of goods, of pieces, but the revenue will drop 3% probably next year, 3 to 5%. But I can calm you down. In 2026, I expect we will be again over 800 million.
Wow, right? That's great news. Vice President. So, however, Taiwan's Industrial Technology Research Institute has actually just released figures saying that Taiwan's industry will buck the global trend and will actually grow 6.1% in terms of production values in 2023. So how is Taiwan bucking the global trend?
Well, I think there are two major reasons. The first one is the semiconductor manufacturing. The business is, in fact, is still growing now. This is very different from the global growth rate. Yeah. And the other is because, as Marco just mentioned, that for memory, normally now we will face economic cycle. Yeah, okay. You have up and the downturn. Yeah, but for logic chips in Taiwan, many IC design houses they focus on the logics instead of memory, and for logic IC, we will see a lot of more business opportunity, and that's the reason why in Taiwan, when the global semiconductor is probably in recession, but in Taiwan, these IC manufacturing and the design housing, they still have a lot of business opportunity, and that's why you will see the growth rate, in Taiwan. Yeah.
That's great. And so it's the more advanced chips that maybe not prone to sort of inflation, obviously from consumer spending.
That's right. Yeah, I would say that, for example, the 5 nanometers, 4 nanometer technology, they are still fully occupied, in TSMC, But for those mature technology nodes, like 28, like 14, probably it's not fully occupied. So I would say that these advanced technology nodes, they are still a lot of customers, on the queue, try to access this advanced one. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Let's take a look at Taiwan's position now within the global market. Ning looks at how Taiwan is leading the world in semiconductors.
Today, semiconductors are used all around us, from smartphones, PCs, cars, and medical machines to household appliances and high-tech weapons. The biggest household name in chips is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and even American business investor Warren Buffett has bought millions of TSMC shares this fall. Why? We break it down and look at how Taiwan is leading the semiconductor business. Here you can see the share of the market by country. In 2022 so far, Taiwan has taken 64% of the global market share. South Korea is next at 17%, followed by China at 8%. Let's take a look at TSMC's position in the industry. TSMC makes chips for Apple, Intel, and other international tech giants. As the leader of the pack, you can see from this chart, it accounts for more than 90% of the 5 to 10 nanometer advanced processors market, while only one other foundry, Samsung, takes a 10% share for the top 5 to 10 nanometer chips.
That was Ning. In December, TSMC will hold the tool-in ceremony for its $12 billion fab in the US state of Arizona, which will start production of 5 nanometer chips in 2024. The first machinery is set to be installed after 18 months of construction at the site. Vice President, let's start with the 3 and 5 nanometer chips that will be introduced to the US. How significant is this move?
Yeah, maybe I can use the silicon wafer, try to explain, what's the major difference between 5 nano and the 3 nanometer technology. In fact, normally to achieve a certain yield, we try to limit the size of the chips, okay? But if the device are shrink, that means you can integrate more transistor on single chip. And because of the integration, then the chip will become more powerful. And once the chip becomes more powerful, you can apply this chip in many applications. And that's the reason why United States government try to push TSMC to open another manufacturing site in the United States. But before that, in fact, TSMC already have a wafer taken in Oregon State. Yeah, but it's not for advanced technology.
What sophistication of chips was it?
Yeah, I think it's for, I would say, very mature technology like 90 nanometer. Yeah, so it's not for very advanced application. Yeah, it's not in the cutting edge technology. And because of the cutting edge technology, many system houses in the United States, like Apple, like Intel, or even Google, probably they would try to access this advanced technology to develop their own chips, to make their final product more competitive in the market.
So it benefits those companies to have the chips being produced on American soil, being localized, I guess.
I would say that's only for semiconductor manufacturing. But if you consider the semiconductor infrastructure, what we call the ecosystem or the supply chain, you still need to provide a very good infrastructure. Otherwise, if you fabricate a chip in the United States and then send back to Taiwan, for other parts, it doesn't make sense. So I think one of the major reasons the United States pushed TSMC to set up the foundry in Arizona State because they would like to make sure that the fabrication they can control. They can control. Yeah, I think that would be the major reason. Yeah, but if you consider the business issue, okay, maybe it's not more competitive compared to those the supply chain in Taiwan. Yeah, so that's my report.
Oh, okay, and so Marco, if you can talk a little bit about that supply chain in Taiwan. when are 5 nanometer chips going to be mass produced in Taiwan, and how about 2 nanometer and even 1 nanometer?
Yeah, I think what CY mentioned right now, the ecosystems what has been built up around the world for semiconductor, a lot of the nations basically lost and declined over the last few decades, right? Japan, Europe, you see a decline, and then Asia, US also, and you see like China and Taiwan basically rising up. So today we have this situation that because of the geopolitics and reshuffling supply chains, that we will end up probably with a more balanced supply chain. So this means if you look in Europe, Europe has a very strong automotive industry. So they have interest, that they also get some control of manufacturing of chips in Europe. USA, as CY managed, because of national security, they also want to have the ability to have this within their country. But if you look overall, the setup how you have in Taiwan is no other country in the world has this kind of setup, because it has been built up since the 70s, where the government and also the ITRI basically pushed this industry where you have like design houses, foundries, packaging, testing. You have the complete value chain, supply chain, what you can do here. And so,
Marco, we've only got 1 minute left, so sure. I want to ask you, so what would this mean then because there are 300 TSMC engineers flying off, relocating to the US. There is obviously, this technology that is going over to the US. Is this a concern for Taiwan? And then also finally, are we embarking on a new era of chip making with the very first cutting edge US fab, TSMC's US fab, and also there could even be a UMC fab also opening up in Detroit? There have been reports about that.
So coming to the technology, USA, even if TSMC will go there, will still lag behind from what is done in Taiwan. That's the first point. The second point is, in regards to volume, the US fab cannot have the output than several TSMC fabs here. So if you hear that Apple will use basically the fab in the USA, is more of a marketing from my perspective, because the volume what you have to put out to please a customer like Apple or AMD is so significant that Taiwan will always have its strengths.
Okay. Still to come in the show, despite global concerns on the risks posed by China against Taiwan's chips, the country's economy minister says de-Taiwanification of the global industry is simply not possible. But first, an ex-TSMC research director is warning that increasing the mass production of TSMC's most advanced chips in the United States could weaken the silicon shield. Here's what Konrad tells our political editor, Wang.
Professor, Taiwan's semiconductor production capacity exceeds 2 million pieces per month, while the US 5 nanometer factory only has 20,000 pieces. Ministry of Economic Affairs Minister Wang Mei-hua emphasized that so-called de-Taiwanization does not exist. Taiwan's semiconductor industry cannot be replaced. How can Taiwan continue to take the lead, in your opinion?
Taiwan has been a leader. It will continue to be a leader. If there's no cross-strait war conflict going on, I think it's very hard to replace that. That part I agree with Wang Mei-hua. However, right now, I think US is trying to move some of the most advanced technology to the US. Okay, at least for TSMC. That itself does pose a certain risk for Taiwan as a production site. Okay, if US manufacturing continues increase the capacity, even though the TSMC is probably still dominate in US manufacturing, but because of the physical side of being in US, kind of the so-called silicon shield effect will have less influence. That's basically that's why I think U.S. government is trying to move that at least mitigate the risk of relying on pure Taiwan production.
That was former TSMC Research Director Konrad talking to Wang. Vice President, if I can ask you the first question, do you agree with Konrad that increasing the current planned level of production in the US would weaken the silicon shield?
From my viewpoint, I would say it's kind of an extension of the semiconductor manufacturing power, and more or less like in Taiwan, we used to welcome some company from Europe, from United States, and to set up a branch, in Taiwan. But now, because we have a very strong semiconductor manufacturing facility and infrastructure, and it's time for Taiwan to contribute to the semiconductor manufacturing for all the people. Okay. So from this viewpoint,
so you don't think it would weaken the silicon shield?
From my background, normally, it takes a lot of time to educate those people involved in this area. So from the past few years, maybe in Europe or even in the United States, some university, in fact, they don't teach semiconductor or design. Okay, but in Taiwan, we still keep this momentum. So at this time, then we hope that we can contribute and try to grow, with all the country. So semiconductor manufacturing is one of the possibilities that we can contribute to the world. So that's from my viewpoint.
Okay.
So I don't think that that will weaken the silicon shield. But in another words, it's a kind of to make the silicon shield more strong.
Okay. Marco, do you agree with that? It actually, conversely, strengthens the silicon shield. Let's remind our viewers what the silicon shield is, which is the protection of Taiwan, that China would not seek to attack Taiwan, or that allies would come to Taiwan's defense. So there would be enough deterrent against an invasion from China.
Okay. I normally would go with the arguments also what CY mentioned. I would say no, it is not weakening the silicon shield. In fact, to go internationally, to go to the US, maybe also go to Europe and to other areas, will strengthen the ties also with these regions. And I think the leading edge technology will mainly always be here in Taiwan. But you need to follow the global trend of a more balanced supply chain. So we are talking about politics, but you can also talk about natural disasters like it happened in Japan. So companies are also checking how foundries are operating. So I think it's a good idea. So you spread the word. A few years ago, probably most of the people did not know about TSMC. Other the people who work in the industry, right? Yeah. But thanks to all this new attraction and information about the semiconductor industry, more people have it on the radar and understand it. So when you talk about this, just to close this real quick, since 2015, the most traded goods in the world is semiconductor. It's the most traded good based on import-export, because a semiconductor good is a few times imported and exported before it goes into a finished good. And so that's quite amazing to see, how important this is.
So are you saying that raising the awareness of the importance of this product helps allies want to protect Taiwan?
That's how I would see it, yes. Okay. And I think instead of putting everything only on this beautiful island, you need to bring it out to the world. And I think to maintain the talents within the companies, I believe that the Taiwanese who work at TSMC are very proud to work at TSMC. And it's quite challenging to tout them away. Right? So I think there might be chances if you go into certain areas in the US, if you go to Arizona, there's the Intel Fab next to it. But I would believe if people would go there, the discipline they have, the dedication they have, and how they basically work in this industry. China has not been able to take a lot of people, when they're building up the semiconductor industry, that this industry will fall apart. So I also don't think that other countries will be able to do this, because people are proud to work for TSMC and contribute.
Well, let's turn to what Taiwan's Economy Minister Wang Mei-hua had to say about the topic. Let's take a look.
甚至更多的要到其他地方去做制造等等。那我要跟他们提供的想法就是，第一个就是台积电或者是台湾的企业，在台湾的形成的这个供应链，不是少数几家制造业者，其实是一个经过40年来完成的一个供应链关系。那就是有这样好的一个完整的供应链，台湾才可以提供这样非常有效率，而且是很有这个成本竞争力的一个产品，让全球可以享受得到这样的一个高科技的成果。原来这个半导体的行业，它其实是在这个生态系里面的厂商才会比较了解，那一般人可能不是那么的了解，那可能觉得说如果这边有风险，那是不是就这个制造的搬走就好了？那我要让更多人知道，就是它不是一家公司，即使在 foundry 制造这个部分，也不是一家公司搬走就可以解决所有的问题。所以我要让更多人知道说，这个的生态系是非常复杂的，也需要很多的资源。
Vice President, now in terms of Japan and South Korea, Japan especially would be also impacted if there was a Taiwan contingency. Let's talk about them as chip makers, these two countries. In Japan, there's been news of sort of 8 heavyweights, including Toyota and Sony Group. They've formed a consortium to basically make 2-nanometer chips in the next 5 years. Yeah. So how competitive is a place like Japan and South Korea?
Well, I think there is a very unique advantage in Taiwan. Yeah, I found that many top-tier students, they still choose EE as their first choice when they pass the entrance examination. Okay, but in Japan, it's not. Okay, so that means because of we have a very good, talent pool, involved in this area. So that means we can keep the research momentum and try the semiconductor industry into the next. So this is very unique, I would say. And if we compare, with the semiconductor manufacturing in South Korea, although they announced the 3-nanometer
6 months ahead of
6 months ago,
TSMC.
But many people know that the yield rate, in fact, is now reach a certain level. Okay, and so I think that TSMC is more conservative. They often, TSMC often announce that when they can reach a certain level where their customer can accept it. Yeah, so this is very different. And in Japan, because now not so many young generation jump in this area, so they need to re-educate the talent pool, and in some sense, they even in research, this 8 company announced that they are going to develop the 2-nanometer technology, several years later. But from the manufacturer viewpoint, maybe it's not so competitive with the solution provided by TSMC, because at that time, then TSMC already has a 2-nanometer or even 1-nanometer solution.
Marco, so moving from Asia now to the EU, to Europe, they've agreed $44.4 billion US dollars in grants, basically to attract chip making on EU soil, similar to the US CHIPS Act. How well do you think the EU can compete with the US in attracting this sort of business?
I think the US, as mentioned before, Germany, they have to do this because we have a strong automotive industry, right? And in Europe, you have also a few strong semiconductor companies or heritage there, like ST Microelectronics, who's in France and in Italy. You have in Germany, in Dresden, where there was formerly AMD, Neumonda, Global Foundries. So there's a good area, especially like Silicon Saxony, so this one part in Germany, where you have a lot of semiconductor company and where you have a good ecosystem. Intel now just announced they will also go to the Eastern Germany and also to produce there. And we need to have this also in Europe in order to secure the supply chains. I mean, as CY mentioned before, at the moment, the shortage of semiconductor is not completely over. There are still pockets of products where cannot be built into a car, and the car, which is maybe 30 to 100,000 euros, cannot be shipped. So I think Europe wants to protect this industry and find ways that the supply chain would be partially also in Europe. And so I believe it's a good move. I'm a friend of a balanced supply chain, right? So that you have locally. It's never good to put all eggs in one basket or just in one territory. So it helps the global supply chain to be more balanced, right? So the big challenge is if you see all the government interference, like the spending, you have the CHIPS Act mentioned in the US, we have this in Europe, Japan is doing. The government has a different driving force, right? So from a businessman perspective, you look just on demand and supply, right? If you put in basically the governments, they not only look at this, they also look at national interest. And this is a little bit more challenging or unpredictable from business perspectives, because now you need to think about, maybe in the future there will be two supply chains, one serving the West, one serving the East. And definitely, I think also Maurice Chung mentioned this, decoupling is impossible and it makes products more expensive. Right? So because if you do this is the price what you pay if you want to do this, that you have like in different areas, like a more balanced supply chain. So
you said two supply chains, one in the East, one in the West.
Yes.
Is that the correct definition of the
probably
of the fragmentation?
I think we are on a road. See, why would you see it? I think we are on a road to that.
Are we talking about China?
Yes.
On one side,
yes,
and the US and its allies on another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
But can I add one comment about Marcus? Just mentioned. I think Europe also has very strong research momentum on semiconductor. Because I stayed in IMEC for a few years.
Correct. Yes.
IMEC is the most famous research institute in semiconductor. But for manufacturing, because they need to have infrastructure like Taiwan, and it's not easy to build within a short time. So maybe in the early stage, they still need to have the support from TSMC to build up the manufacturing side. But later on, then they need to maybe copy or try to invite the supply chain from Taiwan and then stay over there.
I think the big challenge will be the yield, as you mentioned, right? Because in the research institute, they can make also maybe a 1 nanometer or 2 nanometer process. But from a business perspective, to make this profitable or that you can make it commercially vital, I think there for sure TSMC is the leader, even above Samsung and and Intel. They have shown and proven this to the world, and that's, I think, where there's a big difference from the research to manufacturing, where TSMC is in the lead.
That's great. So let's conclude this segment with one-sentence answers. So, what's your view on what the economy minister, Mei-hua, said? It's not possible to de-Taiwanify the supply chain for chips.
I would say that it's not. Okay. It's still possible, but they need to copy the infrastructure from Taiwan, and then it will determine how much time they need to spend and to copy the whole infrastructure.
Maybe a few generations. Marco, one sentence?
Just, I would like to add this. Taiwan will also further progress. Even if the others coming to the point that they reach this, Taiwan is moving forward, right? With the whole education system, with all of this, I think that's where Taiwan will stay ahead of the other regions.
Thank you. Still to come in the show, how China is missing out on an area where all these great powers are pursuing in developing next generation machineries and weaponry. I speak to Roy Lee of the Zhonghua Institution of Economic Research. But first, the updated semiconductor export controls announced by the United States on October 7th sent a jolt through China's chip industry, crushing its ambitions to achieve more self-reliance in a sector that goes to the heart of US-China tech rivalry. Global chip makers that apply for subsidies under the recent US Chips and Science Act, including TSMC and Samsung Electronics, will be barred from investing in advanced chip facilities in China. So, Vice President Lee, how will these curbs, how will they impact China's artificial intelligence industry?
Yeah, if we survey the top-tier AI conference, I would say that many papers are from China. And if we look into this factor, why China produced so many good AI paper is because they have a lot of so-called HPC, high performance computing facilities. And another reason is normally in Europe or in the United States, you need to follow some regulation to use this data set. But in China, maybe it's not, they are not regulation, to follow. So many researchers, they can get any data, they want, and then simulation to generate a certain model. So the AI research activity in mainland China is in terms of publication volume. Now I think it's the race number one. Yeah. So if China faced the, for example, the supply of the high performance computing chips or the computing system, probably the AI research momentum or AI power will become weakened a lot.
And there's one single company, NVIDIA, which has been driving the AI in China. Is that correct?
I think that's from a business viewpoint. They needed to save the chip to every fair, including mainland China. So, but we need to have a certain policy try to regulate how these chips are used. Because in the past, many people, they only talk about the revenue, but now can talk about how these chips are used. So maybe in the near future, AI solution become more so powerful. So we needed to set a certain regulation that if you want to high performance computing chips, then you need to address this chip can be used only for certain area instead of
just banning it all. But that's more difficult, isn't it? So, Vice President, you spoke about the uses, about the applications of AI, and of course one of the key ones is military. Marco, can you talk about the impact that these curbs and these restrictions will have on the PLA?
I think they definitely will have impact short to mid-term, because you need to see in military weapons you have a broad range of ICs, right? You have legacy products, like older process nodes, but kind of the brain which is managing like any type of device, if it's a fighter jet, a weapon, is normally like cutting edge technology, right? Because you need to have a lot of process power. And there definitely the sanctions from the USA have had an impact and will have an impact.
For how long?
That's a good question, because don't underestimate if, for example, if you know that one road is blocked and you cannot go there anymore, which basically the US has done, then all your efforts go to find alternatives and other solutions. So we have seen this. SMIC has been successfully having a technology below 10 nanometer. They do this with multi-patterning, with different type of solution to stretch the old technology. But of course, they also need to find a way. How do they get to EUV technology? How are they able to achieve this? And I think long term,
UE being user experience.
EUV, yeah, it's like ultra. EUV technology is what TSMC is using for the most advanced chips, and the only company in the world who is producing these machines is ASML from the Netherlands. So they are also not allowed to ship this technology to China. So China is completely blocked for this sub-10 nanometer technology on this equipment. But I'm sure they will find also ways to get there with other solutions. You know, they might be able to find this. And coming back to your question, how long do they need? It's very difficult for me to predict. It will definitely be a couple of years. That's why I say short-term impact is there, mid-term also, long-term, they will also be able to catch up. The challenge is with these chips, as CY mentioned, you can use these chips in consumer application and you can use them in military.
So the dual use.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say, oh, you are not allowed to use it in this purpose, but you can use it there. That's really a big challenge, what I see from a technical point of view.
How to police it, right?
No, you cannot. You cannot.
Vice President, final question. So there aren't just the curbs, I guess, from, say, the US CHIPS Act and the Science Act as well, and also these, the latest of the chip export controls. There's also developments in places like the UK, where the UK government has just ordered Nexperia, which is a China-owned chip maker, to unwind its takeover of the largest British chip maker, Newport, citing national security concerns. So do you think that we will see more of this?
Yeah, I think so, because if that's the policy from the United States, and then they needed to ask their partner, like the UK, like other democratic country, try to follow the same rule. Yeah. Otherwise, if you only block a certain area and you leave other region, to have the leakage, then this policy.
It's like the choke points that Marco mentioned.
You
go around it a different way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I would say that. When we talk about the semiconductor manufacturing, we always mention to our students, our young generation, that we can have our life better because of the semiconductor chips, right? Yeah, but that was the history now. Yeah, and now we face that now these high performance chips can be applied in every field, and even some of them we make our life worse. Okay, so I think that we need to reconsider this issue. Otherwise, high tech, can be benefited, but it can make our life even worse. So
you believe a chips war could end up in a lose-lose situation?
Yeah, that's right.
More detail on China's chips market and the impact of the US's latest chip export controls. I spoke earlier to Roy Lee, Zhonghua Institution of Economic Research, WTO Trade Center Deputy Director.
Now, China has spent the last 20 years trying to create a domestic, a homegrown semiconductor sector. But at this moment, the latest production technology in China virtually stops at 14 nanometer. It seems that China has difficulty overcome this technology threshold at 14 nanometer.
What effect does that have on China's development of science and technology? Or is this many, many years away? If it is, if you can talk about the immediate impact that will be felt on businesses.
The immediate impact will be China will be increasing relying on Taiwan and South Korea's made advanced chips. And also China will be increasingly relying on the authorization or approval by US and the other alliance governments in terms of the provision of advanced softwares for semiconductor designs. And also it will have an impact on China's development for other applications, especially in quantum computing and artificial intelligence applications. So the impact will be, there will be a significant spillover effect that goes beyond just the semiconductor sector. You will also see a delay of China's development in those advanced application sites. And also, finally, there is a military implication. We understand that advanced chips have, most of the advanced chips have a dual use feature. That means those chips are not only for commercial development, but that they are also required for the development of advanced weaponry.
So does that mean things like missiles and, submarines and, aircraft carriers, that sort of?
For the military side, there are at least two direct implications. First of all, the level of semiconductors that's being accessible and being used in machineries will define the precision, the level of precision of future generation weaponry. It is area where all these great powers are pursuing in developing next generation machineries and weaponries.
Do you think China could be happy in a sense of dominating the lower end of chips, given that there are still, many appliances that actually can use these lower end chips? Is the market still growing for those lower end?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, let's be clear. China will not be tolerating this from happening. So in the last 10 years, one of the objectives of China's semiconductor policy is to develop a supply system that is not dominated by the US, or to minimize the technology bottlenecks that are controlled by US and US-based companies, such that to reduce the level of vulnerability of China. And they have succeeded in some of the matured segments of the supply chain networks. So based on what they have been achieving in the last 20 years, and also considering the fact that for mature chip segment, the global demand is growing. For example, for electric vehicles, which China already dominates the world, the demand for semiconductors is actually on the rise. 10 years ago, for traditional automobile, about 10% of the cost of manufacturing a car goes to purchasing of chips.